Adelaide, the city of churches, was and still is a quiet metropolis generally. However, in the 1920s things got a bit rowdy, blamed on an influx of Victorian criminals, Melbourne being well known for its gang crime. One of those violent moments erupted in Tavistock Street, a now vanished thoroughfare. It was a narrow road that ran from North Terrace to Rundle Street. Its namesake, the Tavistock Hotel, stood on the Rundle Street corner from 1857 until it was demolished in 1962. There was a plan to create a wide boulevard through here. Other old buildings were knocked down to widen Tavistock Street and Ackland Street, and others bulldozed to link them, creating what is now Frome Street. The only reminder of the past being a small alley called Tavistock Lane, running west off Frome Street. The story of the shootout began not in Tavistock Street, but in North Adelaide. Francis Weston, a resident of Bernard Street, on the night of the 5th of July 1929, noticed a couple of men loitering in the yard outside his home. Rather suspicious of their motives, he decided to phone the police. Constables Mitchell and Judd arrived and spoke to the men. One was named William Frank Perry, the other was Edward Cosgrove. When asked what they were doing, Cosgrove said that he, Perry, and two others, named Harold Goscombe and Chris Allen, had come together to the house, and he was asked to ring the bell. He declined and waited while the two of the others went off somewhere. Dissatisfied with their answers, the constables decided to escort the men to the police station. In fact, the four men had come to Weston's house with the intent of burgling it, if nobody answered the doorbell. As they walked away, two other men approached. One of the men, a fair-haired young man of athletic build, at least 5'10" tall, with a boyish face, pulled out a gun and started firing at the police. Constable Mitchell caught a bullet in his leg. The shooter ran off and evaded apprehension while the other three men were quickly rounded up. The fourth man was George Christopher Percival Allen, aged 22. Police were on the lookout for Allen and had checked the Botanic Gardens on the morning of Monday the 8th of July without success. But during the afternoon at about 3:30 p.m, Detectives Ferguson and Gill were walking through the park when they spied their quarry 150 yards ahead. Noticing he'd been spotted, Allen took off with the speed of a trained runner, through the gardens to the northwest corner, through the seeding area, and nimbly leapt a galvanised iron fence 5'8" high into the grounds of the Royal Adelaide Hospital. The detectives were losing ground until Gill commandeered a bicycle from a man on North Terrace. As Gill pursued on the bicycle, Allen dashed down Tavistock Street and into a laneway behind the hotel. He turned into another alley and stopped at the corner. He took aim at Gill, who was about 8 yards away, and fired before running off again. Gill shot back 4 times before his pistol jammed, one of the bullets hitting Allen in the leg. Allen ran off again and hid in the freezer compartment of the producer's cold storage, unnoticed by any of the workers, who told police they had not seen anyone. Half an hour later, Allen was noticed by an employee and asked what he was doing. Without hesitation, he said he was waiting to meet a Mr. Saunders, or a Mr. Smith, by one telling of the story. Told nobody of that name was here, he said that Saunders was storing fruit there, and they had an appointment. When again told there was no Saunders, he expressed regret and left. Meanwhile, a large crowd attracted by the sound of shots had gathered. All available police officers were sent to the area to comb it and the gardens for any sign of the fugitive. They searched for hours, but Allen had deftly eluded them. A warrant was issued for Allen's arrest on a charge of shooting at Sergeant Gill with intent to murder him the following day. A photograph and description of the wanted man was published in the newspapers, with police advising he may try to rent a room in a lodging house. He was likely to have 2 or 3 suitcases and a portable gramophone with him. Next to the story on the front page of the News on July the 9th was an article relating the trial of John McGrath, another young man who had shot dead Constable Holman during a pursuit in Adelaide in February of that year. Allen was an Englishman, born at Retford near Nottingham on the 24th of June 1907. He had brown eyes, and it was noted his hair became noticeably frizzy when wet. His insteps were peculiarly high, making the toes of his shoes turn up. At the time of the shooting, he was wearing a grey suit, grey felt hat, and brown shoes. He had come to Australia on the Bendigo in 1923 when he was 16. He worked for a time on farms at Peak, Allawoona, Wobby and Paroona, and came to Adelaide in December 1927 and lived on £40 he had saved until March 1928. He then tramped the country looking for employment and got work on Inaminka Station in the far north, where he stayed until December 1928. He returned to Adelaide with £30, but sent £21 of it to his parents in England. Things were pretty crook, he later stated. I had no money left and no work. I began breaking in. A few days after the shootings, he buried his guns in the park lands. He had decided he wouldn't use the gun again, even to avoid capture. Possibly the slug in his leg influenced his thinking. Several reports of sightings were phoned in, keeping the police busy but unproductive as they chased down the leads to no avail. One report claimed he was hiding in a cave in the Adelaide Hills. 3 men who looked like Alan were reported from one tramcar at Prospect. On the 10th of July, a tram driver on Park Terrace, today's Greenhill Road, at Keswick, noticed a man by the side of the road and slowed down, thinking he may be trying to catch the tram. As he did so, he noticed the man was holding something he took to be a revolver. The conductor, wondering why the tram was slowing, also looked out, and it's thought the ticket punch he held in his hand, catching the streetlights, could have looked like a gun held by a policeman, for as soon as he glimpsed the conductor, the mystery man ran and vaulted a fence into the parklands and ran away. 3 constables scoured the parklands in the area, but could find nobody. All across the state, police checked on boarding houses, vacant houses and empty sheds. Because Chris had worked in the country, it was suspected he may flee there, or try to slip over the border interstate. Another false lead came from a train driver who claimed he could identify Alan in a car stopped at a level crossing at Nakara in the Flinders Ranges. Yet another report was received about a man looking for lodgings in Broken Hill on the 13th of July. On the 15th of July, it was reported a stowaway on a ship from Adelaide was arrested and thought to be Alan, though he proved not to be. The Yunta Hotel was robbed and was claimed a man resembling Alan had been seen there earlier. Police stuck to their belief that Alan was hiding somewhere in Adelaide with the help of friends. Also on the 15th, Edward Cosgrove was found guilty of loitering at Barnard Street, but Detective McGrath, who had known Cosgrove for 15 years, and a retired police sergeant gave evidence about Cosgrove's good character. He had sustained a head injury when young, which affected his ability to learn. It was thought he had no idea what Alan and the others planned to do that night. He was given a £10 bond to be of good behaviour for 12 months. It was said he was going to go and live with his parents in the country. Harold John Goscombe, who had left Barnard Street before the shooting, was arrested at the unemployed camp at the exhibition building on North Terrace on the 6th of July. He was released on a £20 12-month good behaviour bond. Alan's roommate, 22-year-old William Frank Perry, was charged on the 18th of July in relation to 3 break-ins he and Alan had committed in June. Perry said Alan would enter the houses while he stayed outside keeping watch. In September, Perry was sent inside for 2.5 years. On the 16th, food and a small amount of cash were stolen from the Callington railway station. Alan was suspected, although he wasn't the only man who was hungry at the time. A woman at College Road, Kent Town, saw a man lurking in the moonlight on the 17th of July and was convinced it was Alan. He had rented a room in the same boarding house 2 years earlier, which gave police hope they might finally catch him. But again, if it was Alan, the man eluded their efforts. The man at Broken Hill was finally tracked down, and once more, although bearing a resemblance, was not the man who was sought. Robberies and attempted robberies in inner-city eastern suburbs of Dulwich and Evandale were all blamed on Alan by the press and public. At least one of them was his doing. Alan left his shoes behind at a house he robbed at Dulwich, and while police were searching for him, He was in another house just 100 yards away at Rose Park. He told the homeowner, a Mr. Irvine, as he stood in wet stockinged feet, that he had been unemployed for some time, and asked if Irvine had any old boots he could have, saying his own shoes were so old they fell apart, and he'd had to throw them away. In the midst of all the speculation where Alan was and what he was doing, a letter was received by the News newspaper. The letter, dated 21st of July 1929, purported to be from Alan himself. While there was initial scepticism, a comparison of the handwritten note with a known specimen of Alan's writing showed that he had indeed written it. To the editor, The News. Dear Sir, I wish to correct a statement which appeared in the Mail on Saturday night. It was to the effect that a man went to the house of a Mr. Irvine in Rose Park on Thursday night and said he was cold and hungry and asked for a pair of boots. The paper states that Mr. Irvine gave the man a meal and a pair of shoes. He's a good liar. I did not have a meal. Neither did I say I was cold and hungry. I was far from cold, and I was fool enough to go hungry once upon a time, but never now. I lost my shoes and had to have another pair, and as there were no shops handy, I had to beg a pair. About the robbery at a Mr. C. Smart's house, Evandale, on Friday night. It was not me. I was in my flat all night from 6:30. Don't blame everything onto me. You might compliment Detective W. Gill on his shooting. Thanks to him I am going about with a bullet in my knee. Still, it is not bad yet. I can still run. I am yours truthfully, C. Allen. Sorry, can't put address. On the afternoon of the 23rd of July, Allen was enjoying a movie at the Regent Theatre. He had gone to see The Donovan Affair, a murder mystery, and the first talkie directed by Frank Capra. Somebody noticed him and phoned police at 1:30 p.m. 5 detectives arrived soon after, 3 of them guarding the entrances, while Detectives Gill and Ferguson went to the dress circle where Allen was seated in the 3rd row from the middle aisle, near the left-hand side. The 2 detectives sat down in the seats behind Allen, and in the dim light scrutinised him. Convinced it was the man they sought, each policeman grabbed an arm. "We're police officers. Have you got a gun?" one said. A torchlight was flashed on the man's face, only to reveal it was not Allen. The detectives had grabbed the wrong man. Allen was sitting 2 seats down from another man and tried to shield his face with his left hand and bluff it out, but then they grabbed his hands. Allen stood up and tried to escape, but was held tight. He was unarmed when captured. The sound of the scuffling alerted the other filmgoers to something happening, and soon the audience was standing watching the drama in their own midst. One woman screamed. The other young man, grabbed in error, stayed on to enjoy the rest of the film. Later, he said it had been a thrill to have had real police appear during the show. Allen was hustled out of the cinema and down the stairs. Already the news was beginning to spread of the wanted man's capture, and a crowd gathered in the vestibule to observe him being taken into custody. Allen was taken to the watch house and a doctor checked the bullet in his leg, just near his knee. Allen had treated the wound himself, being careful to avoid doctors and hospitals. He revealed that after the shooting, he had hidden in a cold store and then after a while silently slipped out and hailed a taxi on North Terrace to make good his escape. He surreptitiously visited his lodging house in Rundle Street and retrieved 2 suitcases and his gramophone, and took these and concealed them on the north bank of the River Torrens. But when he returned for them, found they had been stolen. He claimed he walked to Murray Bridge, but then changed his mind and walked back to Adelaide, a distance of just over 40 miles each way. Back in Adelaide, he located an unoccupied house belonging to a Mr. Moore on East Terrace on the 18th of July and invited himself in. He slept in a comfortable bed, used the bathroom, and cooked his meals in the kitchen. When he heard a cleaning woman arrive on Monday, he hastily left via the front door. He said he had intended to lay low for a few weeks, and then disguise himself as a woman and leave the state. In court in September, Allen pleaded not guilty. He maintained that he had deliberately avoided shooting Gill, but fired only to deter him from the chase. When the charges were altered from attempted murder to shooting to avoid lawful apprehension, he pled guilty, as he also did to 3 charges of housebreaking and larceny. He said, "In my search for work, I starved many times, and a starving man does not view things normally. I now realise how serious are the crimes, but I can truthfully say that I did not for one moment think I would ever be considered the desperate criminal which the newspapers made me out to be. I am deeply sorry for causing all the trouble I have." He asked the judge, the Chief Justice Sir George Murray, for leniency. "I am 22 years of age, and am hopeful that your honour will deal with me in such a way that it will not be impossible for me to again become a decent citizen." Allen was sentenced to 10 years' imprisonment. Others who had figured in robberies and shootings received similar terms, and the Chief Justice, dismayed by the rise of such crimes, said in future if firearms were used, he would order whippings as part of the sentences. Allen was sent to Yatala Labour Prison, north of Adelaide. In November, James Hudson Irvine, the man who had taken pity on Allen and given him old boots, sued the News for £500 for damaging his reputation by inferring he had sheltered Allen. He had not taken him into his house, nor had he provided him food, he stated. In the end, he was awarded £75 compensation for the libel. In Yatala, Allen met another prisoner named Vili Vaka Harkalinen. When they got talking, Harkalinen declared that he was innocent and serving 7 years for a robbery he did not commit. When Allen heard the details about the robbery, which had taken place on the 19th of June 1927 at a house on Hackney Road, Hackney, he claimed it was one he had done. In the early hours of the morning, Mrs. Stella Murphy, her son Jack, and a friend named Miss Emery were held at gunpoint by a man with a handkerchief tied over his face and relieved of £2 worth of silver. Harkalinen was identified 6 weeks later at a police line-up by Jack Murphy. Although he said he had never seen a photo of the suspect, a policeman had shown Jack a photo of Harkalinen on the day of the robbery. Allen signed an affidavit in April 1930 which said, "On the night of June the 18th, 1927, I walked from Wells Lodging House in Hindley Street, Adelaide, to a house on Hackney Road, Hackney, about opposite the Tramways Trust car barn. I went round to the back and entered through the door, which was open. There were no lights burning. I took off my shoes, leaving them outside. I entered a couple of rooms and looked through some drawers, but did not find anything worth taking. I found a bottle of hock and had a drink. Then I went into the dining room. Walking into a front bedroom, I switched on the light and saw 2 persons in bed. I turned off the light and made to leave the house. At that moment, a motor car drove in and pulled up. I saw somebody coming toward the house. I didn't know what to do. I went back into the bathroom, slipping the key from the outside to the inside of the door. I heard a man's voice say, 'Did you have a light on in there?' Some reply was made, and the people looked round the house, but did not come into the bathroom. After a while I came out of the bathroom and sat down on a settee in the front room, thinking what I had better do. I was very tired and went to sleep." Continuing, Allen stated that he had awakened some time later and placed a brown silk handkerchief round his face. He took from his pocket a large German automatic pistol with a barrel about 9 inches long. He had taken it from a man at Peruna, where he had been employed. Allen stated that he went to a bedroom, the door of which was open. He switched on the light. He was hard up at the time and did not think what he was doing. Allen added that he saw 2 women in the bed and a man laying down on the floor. The women woke up and one said, "What do you want?" According to Allen, he replied, "I want some cash," at the same time pointing the gun at the man. One of the women, Allen stated, said, "Don't hurt my boy," and he replied, "I want money." The women told Allen they didn't have any, as somebody had been there previously and had taken it all. To a further demand by Allen, the woman told him to get her handbag from off the washstand. He obtained about 5 shillings. Allen then slipped quickly out of the house. He put on his shoes and walked through Botanic Park to Frome Road. He hid in a lavatory until about 7:30, when he returned to the boarding house. Hakulinen won his appeal, but was immediately subject to deportation home to Finland and held at Adelaide jail. As a further insult, his bid for compensation was rejected by the government. On Saturday morning, the 26th of July 1930, Allen teamed up with convicted murderer John Stewart, and using a rope made of bed sheets, they attempted to climb the wall of the jail and escape. Allen made it to the top, but as he was helping to pull Stewart up, a guard spotted them. Stewart gave up at once, so Allen climbed back down. It was the third escape attempt by prisoners from Yatala in a fortnight. In August 1930, Allen was charged with robbery under arms at Hackney in 1927. Amazingly, he pleaded not guilty, but even more incredibly, the prosecution dropped the case, even though Allen's confession had freed Hakulinen. It was theorised that Allen had lied about the robbery to ensure Hakulinen was freed, and then made a bid for compensation, which he would share with Allen, and also to give Allen increased notoriety. Hakulinen was put aboard a ship to Finland on the 16th of October 1930. Allen was a free man by August 1940. On the 27th of that month he joined the army, but remained only 3 months, before being discharged for family reasons. He was a panel worker living at 100 Wright Street, Adelaide, with his common-law wife, Kathleen May Walsh, at the time. Chris Allen died at Marston on the 10th of May 1991, just shy of his 84th birthday. The policeman he shot at North Adelaide, John K. Mitchell, had passed away on the 23rd of October 1986, aged 87. Tavistock Street no longer exists as it was, and the side alley where Allen stopped to fire from is now the site of a multi-storey building. The cold store is gone. Today, the Elephant British pub stands on the spot, but the lane where Gill was shot at remains. Quiet, obscure, and unremarkable. The echoes of the long-forgotten shootout fallen silently into the dark corners of history.